Hello and welcome to episode 11 of How Positive Are You? This is Christine Maggiore, author of the book, What If Everything You Thought You Knew About AIDS Was Wrong?
And I'm David Crow, president of Rethinking AIDS, a group of scientists, doctors, lawyers, journalists, and other educated and accomplished people who question the HIV/AIDS hypothesis.
In today's episode, we speak with Dr. Jocelyn Dee. She's an AIDS specialist at USC's Rand Schrader Clinic, where poor, uneducated, uninsured, often illiterate, sometimes homeless, and frequently drug-addicted HIV positives can receive medical care regardless of ability to pay. She also serves as an advisor for fictional television programs that feature real-life medical issues in their storylines. It was in this latter capacity that Dr. Dee worked on the recent Law Order SVU episode Retro, which took on the topic of AIDS denialism. According to Dr. Dee, a combination of ignorance of biomedical facts about AIDS and guilt over testing HIV positive is usually at the root of her patient's denial, a problem she says she deals with on a daily basis. Join us for this lively and informative conversation as we tread carefully through a minefield of remarks about AIDS denialism with an obviously smart and very dedicated doctor who has no idea, at least for the first part of our program, she's talking to those people.
It's going to be a real challenge for us for the first time to discuss these issues with somebody whose opinions are so diametrically opposed to ours.
But it's our goal here at How Positive Are You to create dialogue, to open up the lines of discussion, and if possible to create a bridge between these so-called sides or points of view, and to do whatever we can also to correct this notion that anybody who has any questions about this is somehow in denial.
Well, it will be very interesting to see whether the discussion stays civilized all the way through. That's certainly my goal.
Mine as well, David. I understand you have some feedback. And
and statistics.
Great.
We've broken through a new record. We've now had a total of over 4,000 downloads. And in November alone, we had over 1,000, which was the best month so far. And this doesn't even include our new website, howpositiveareyou.com. And I've also had a couple of questions, people saying, well, on your website, there's a little listener button that I can listen to your podcast, but I can't download it. How do I download the MP3s if I go to your website? Well, on the front page of the website, on the left-hand side, there's a button, iTunes, and another button called RSS. So depending on the type of MP3 player you have, or if you wish to listen to it on your computer, if you click one of those two buttons, that will get you to the MP3 files. And if you do have iTunes or an iPod, then the iTunes button is by far the best one to press because the episodes will essentially come to you automatically.
Or you can always do what I do, which is ask my husband to make it better.
That's definitely another approach. We've got a little bit of feedback, too. Karsten wrote and said, gosh, I can't tell you how much I enjoyed listening to podcasts 6 and 7. They were both very informative and excellently done. That's really nice to hear. Another person who doesn't wish to be named, and I think you'll understand when you hear a little bit of his story, says, I wanted to write and let you know that your podcast is my favorite thing to listen to these days. I made the mistake of listening to my doctor a year and a half ago and agreeing to a so-called HIV test, and it came back positive. My doctor's response was to cry and tell me I had to immediately see a specialist. I asked her if I should get a second opinion. She said no, and that there was no point because I could just get the viral load test, etc., and have my numbers watched. I am now well aware of how ignorant she was and have been doing every bit of research possible to arm myself with the information I need to face people like her in the future. I never did go see a specialist, by the way. Instead, I've been detoxing, going on a strict diet, exercising, breathing plenty of fresh air, swimming in the ocean, and generally living a healthy life. I check for updates every day on aliveandwell.org, aris.ab.ca, hivskeptic.wordpress.com, and more, and I can't seem to find any flaws in the logic of these dissident arguments. Please keep up the good work. It's beginning to gain momentum for sure. I am an artist and nobody thinks I'm qualified to debate such scientific concepts. I've decided to let the scientists speak for me. I've bought the books Fear of the Invisible, Serious Adverse Events, The Origin, Persistence, and Failing of HIV/AIDS Theory, and 10 Lies About AIDS. So I can make this Christmas an educational one.
Wow, that's beautiful.
Yes. Yeah, it's very nice.
Any more?
That's all the feedback I have for this month.
Well, I think that is one feedback is worth 1,000 feedbacks when it's that beautiful.
Yes, definitely. I do have a few news items. I understand you have one too.
That's right.
The first one has the rather interesting title, Man Loses Penis Power Over Septrin. This is from a newspaper in Uganda called Red Pepper, and I guess the title of the newspaper is appropriate with headlines like that.
You said pepper, right?
Red Pepper.
Okay, just making sure. I want to keep this a family program.
That's right, yes. This news item is from Winnie in the UK, who follows events in Uganda, her home country, closely. Septrin is also known as Septra and Bactrim, and this antibiotic is very potent and is commonly given to HIV-positive people just in case to supposedly prevent PCP. In this case, the drug was given for dental surgery, but it's the side effects that we're interested in here, so that doesn't really matter. Quoting from the news article, Kawisi has totally suspended bonking for the foreseeable future.
I'm sorry. The family program.
I'm sorry, I'm just reading it like it was written.
Okay.
Kawisi has totally suspended bonking for the foreseeable future after suffering from a severe erectile dysfunction due to his body reacting badly to Septrin. Kawisi, who has suffered blisters and seen his skin peeling off, which is something like Stevens-Johnson syndrome or toxic epidermal necrosis, has also suffered from those side effects as well as erectile dysfunction. It's not really funny. He could have died from this reaction. This drug, Septrin, is handed out like candy to HIV-positive people, as I said, not because they're particularly ill, but because it's believed that they will get sick in the future, so they give drugs that can make you sick.
What's especially concerning about Bactrim, Septrin, is there are people from certain parts of the world who have a genetic predisposition toward allergic reaction, which includes the burning and peeling of the skin and other profound effects, and rarely, if ever, are they told about this prior to beginning the drug.
Yes, and it was for a short time anyway. In the 1990s, the drug was banned in England because of the number of adverse effects, and yet continually I see people implying that this drug is really pretty harmless. I guess
my mother took it a couple years ago, right about this time of the year, for a bladder infection she supposedly had, which she didn't feel, but it showed up on lab work, and she was given a short course of Bactrim. It was the first Thanksgiving ever that she didn't spend with us. She could not make it out of the house. She was so sick. And she continued to be sick even though it was a 5-day course through Christmas, and was still feeling the effects of this all the way into April of the next year when we were on a trip together. So, taking it every day, I've always wondered about, and I just wonder about the idea. They tell you you're HIV positive, therefore it's more likely that you would develop a type of pneumonia that Bactrim, Septrin can treat. So we're going to give it to you every day to prevent you from getting that. It's like saying you live in an area subject to brush fires. So in order to protect you, we're going to every day pour water all over your house all day long.
Hey, don't give the firefighters any ideas.
Well, it'll destroy your house. It'll create other problems like mold, right. and your roof will cave in. And then, it's just the logic behind that is just completely out there for me. Well, I don't get it.
Speaking of logic, what's the logic in announcing, as NPR did, based on what they claim is information from AIDS experts and federal health officials, announcing that there's 1 million people in America who are HIV positive? They've been announcing this for about 20 years. To quote Kenneth Meyer of Brown University, more than 20% of people with HIV, more than 200,000 people, are unaware they're infected. Well, 20%, if 20% is 200,000, 100% is 1 million. And they've been saying 1 million people are HIV infected since the 1980s, and they've been saying about something like a quarter of them are unaware of it.
When are these people going to wake up?
I don't know. I guess they're healthy. They're not experiencing any health consequences. They don't realize the benefits that they could obtain by taking toxic drugs that can give you things like Stevens-Johnson syndrome and toxic epidermal necrosis and maybe erectile dysfunction as well, just to make your day complete.
Yeah, and the whole idea that somehow somebody knows what other people don't know about themselves is just such an interesting concept to me that is always part of these new old news announcements on this topic.
Yeah, well, it's part of a drive to get everybody tested. The news article from NPR, which for those who aren't Americans, that's National Public Radio. The CDC would like to see HIV tests done routinely in medical practice unless a patient refuses. So they want to flush out that 200,000 people because effectively they're running out of AIDS patients in America. And so they need to do a testing of hopefully 100% of the population so that they can, keep all these AIDS organizations and AIDS clinics going.
David, do I detect a slight tone of cynicism there?
Yeah, I think so. This is all based on money, and they need to keep a steady stream of patients to keep the justification for the high levels of funding alive.
But I bet there's a lot of people working in the field who think this is a grand idea so that they can get to those people who need help, who need treatment, who need counseling, who need to be aware of the risks and so forth. So I don't know that it necessarily is overtly motivated by a desire for funding and so forth. I think that within this discussion there are a lot of good-intentioned people, but that their intentions are oftentimes led astray by silly news items like this.
That's possible, but in the area of flu, for example, there was a Harper's Magazine article which included a PowerPoint presentation by the CDC, which was overtly trying to drum up the fear of the flu to increase levels of vaccination. I mean, this was very clear that they knew what they were doing.
I remember that, but again, there's probably people within that who think even if we have to drum up fear and do so in a way that is unrealistic and preposterous, it's a good thing because we'll get people to be vaccinated, which is a good thing.
Well, yeah, just like they don't want to talk about the mercury in the flu vaccine because, that would discourage people from getting vaccinated. I mean, I understand that these people are sincere, but there is such a thing as informed consent. And when it comes to the HIV test, maybe people should be told the consequences of a positive HIV test, apart from the fact that we have new drugs that aren't as toxic as the old drugs.
And also the fact, too, that the tests aren't really testing for HIV or any unique or specific markers for HIV.
There's one other news item. Do you want to introduce a news item about microchips
just
in
in time
Indonesia?
for Christmas, there's some good news from Indonesia. The legislature of an Indonesian province is considering a bill to implant microchips into HIV positives. This would enable authorities to, quote, be in a better position to identify, track, and ultimately punish those who deliberately infect others with up to 6 months in jail or a $5,000 U.S. fine. I thought that was some cheery news that we shared.
I find it interesting. In my day job, I work in telecommunications, and I'm very familiar with this technology, which is called RFID, or radio frequency identification. And all it does is to identify a person. You get the same information from it, well, less than you would from looking at somebody's identification papers, like a driver's license. So I think the only reason to do this is to humiliate and dehumanize people who are HIV positive. There's no technical reason to do this.
It seems rather odd, and it also says here that the government has narrowed its scope, saying, quote, the chips will only be implanted in those who are sexually aggressive. However, it has not said how it would determine who fits the description of sexually aggressive, or how many people that might include.
Yes, I guess anybody who refused to believe in HIV, who claimed that they did not have a deadly virus, might fit that category.
Maybe so. And just one more thing here, David. I have something from a recent Los Angeles County HIV/AIDS epidemiology report that I thought was interesting. We have here the grand total of all AIDS cases ever diagnosed in Los Angeles County, and I think it's very interesting that we in Los Angeles continue to do what the U.S. Centers for Disease Control no longer does in their own survey reports. That is, in Los Angeles County, they break down the reasons why people were given an AIDS diagnosis. That is, what disease they had that caused them to be given their AIDS diagnosis.
Oh, that's very interesting.
Yeah, it's still, other states and counties do this too. And it's always very interesting to look at. Here in Los Angeles County, as it turns out, 69% of females ever given a diagnosis of AIDS in the entire period of time known as the AIDS epidemic were given that diagnosis based on not being sick. And
what percentage was that?
Pardon me?
60%?
69.
69%.
So almost 70% of all women in Los Angeles County ever given a diagnosis of AIDS were given that diagnosis not based on any kind of AIDS-defining illness, but on a lab marker and a positive test result, that lab marker being a CD4 T-cell count. And in men, it is 54% of all men ever given an AIDS diagnosis in Los Angeles County were given that diagnosis based not on any kind of illness, but this new category of techno-AIDS.
Well, this goes back to our podcast, What is AIDS? I mean, most people would be shocked to realize that AIDS is no longer an illness. I mean, it never was an illness. It was a syndrome, but it's not even a syndrome now because there's not even a cluster of illnesses because the majority of people who are diagnosed with AIDS are not sick at the time of the diagnosis, or at least not sick with any illness that's blamed on HIV.
Right. Which can't help but to lead to questions in people. And that leads us to the topic of our program. What is the difference between someone who asks questions and someone who's in denial? How do you tell when someone's inquiry, concerns, or questions place them in that category known as denialism?
Well, maybe we should phone up Dr. Dee and maybe she can help us answer some of those questions.
Let's give her a ring.
Okay.
Hello and welcome to How Positive Are You, Dr. Jocelyn Dee. We appreciate you joining us today.
Thank you.
So, to begin, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? I know that you're a doctor at the Schrader Clinic.
Mm-hmm.
What is it that you do there?
So I am the assistant medical director for the clinic. We are a county clinic that services people who have infectious diseases, including HIV. I typically see patients in the morning, and then I do more supervisory work and administrative work in the afternoon. But we try to help anyone who comes by our door.
And you also work as a consultant to the television industry?
Yes. So very interestingly, we were contacted by an organization called Hollywood in Health to help advise a TV program called Law Order SVU because they were interested in doing storylines related to infectious diseases and HIV/AIDS. And they wanted to get some input from physicians to try to make their storylines more realistic.
So when Law and Order SVU came to you, they had a story that they already wanted to tell, or did you help in the shaping of that story?
So actually, we had a room full of people. We had several writers there, including some press people and someone from Hollywood in Health, and they were all writing stories. So they did not tell us what the stories were about because they were still shaping them. They just asked us basic questions about HIV and about denialism, and actually even just infectious diseases in general. So they did not tell us what any of the stories were about.
When you say press people were there, was this a special occasion, or do they roll out the red carpet every time they have an advisor come by?
It seemed like it was special because it was a new program that they put into effect with Hollywood and Health. They were doing that with organ donations and HIV at the time.
I see. Now, I wanted to ask you some specific questions with regard to the development of this particular Law and Order program. Have you had a chance to look at that yet?
Actually, I did look at the clips, and I started with the TV program, and I realized that it was very difficult for me to go into great detail with that particular episode called Retro because as a physician myself and being in the front lines and seeing people suffer through no fault of their own, and having young children of my own and actually expecting another, it was quite difficult for me to relive that through someone else because I see that on a daily basis, and then to actually live through it again fictionally was to the point of unbearable. So I had a very difficult time, because I can suspend my disbelief very easily, and I can put myself into the situations, which can or cannot be a good thing for a doctor. But I do know about the storyline.
So when you say relive...
I'm sorry, David.
Yeah, when you say relive, I don't quite understand, because you're not... How did you relate to this woman in the story, or were you relating to other aspects?
So actually, because I have young children of my own, I can understand... I can understand denial because, and we do care for quite a few young women in my practice as well. That there is a sense of guilt. There can be a sense of guilt, and it is often easier to deny something than to have to face up to the consequences of decisions or acts that you've made in your past, and unfortunately, it can end up really causing more suffering in the end, as we saw.
Now, I know that when you are most likely at a county facility,
yes.
and you mentioned you take anyone through your doors,
yes.
you're probably dealing with low income?
Yeah, so a lot of our patients are indigent. Not all of them, but many of them are. And I've actually had to work through all of their problems. A lot of our patients have more socioeconomic problems that we have to deal with. And then to see someone without the socioeconomic problems and yet still have the same the same medical problems is very disconcerting.
So you're referring in this case to the character in the teleplay that wasn't indigent, and yet you say has similar characteristics to the indigent, perhaps drug-addicted patients that you see?
Yes.
What would be the difference between guilt and denial, in your opinion?
Well, I think everyone's got guilt in some way, especially growing up Catholic. We've all got guilt, but how we deal with the guilt is different for everyone, and unfortunately, I'm not a psychiatrist. I can't tell you all the specifics about it, but some people deal with it with denial, and it's particularly unfortunate when you have innocent children involved.
How does denial manifest? I mean, what would be the distinguishing mark between guilt and denial? Where is the line drawn? And if you could describe what is denial, what do you see in a patient that lets you say, oh, here's a person in denial?
So when you so it's a little more challenging in our situation because a lot of our patients here at the county are educationally challenged. They didn't have a chance to go to school and to learn how to read, et cetera, even in their own mother tongue. We try to provide support services to adequately educate patients about the disease process. So to teach them pretty much like an HIV 101 in their own primary language. Of course, we have interpreters here, and we have people who specialize in that here. So we try to work with patients according to their own educational level, and when we feel like we've been able to answer all of their questions, and yet they're still unable to deal with the issues, then we start suspecting that there's some denialism involved.
Now, what is the difference? And I know you're not a psychiatric expert, and we're keeping that in mind as we engage in this discussion. What would be the difference between somebody who says, I am not indigent, I have attended school, I can read quite well, I'm not drug addicted, I've just done a lot of research, and I feel that there are outstanding questions with regard to not only the relationship between HIV and AIDS in a scientific manner, but also I have serious concerns about the effects of the drugs, and I'm feeling good right now, and I would like to forego drug therapies for the time. Is that a person in denial?
Actually, that could be someone who is actually quite sane, because there are a lot of questions that are left unanswered in HIV and AIDS, and no one will say, at least truthfully, that they have all the answers. There have not been any experiments, and of course this is ethically reasonable, that we would purposefully give someone HIV and see what happens to them. And so we would not be able to fulfill Koch's postulates, the scientific reasoning that we usually like to go through. But so I understand that. I'm actually quite happy when I know that people have thought about it, because there are patients who don't want to think about it at all. And when someone says they've thought about it and they're concerned about side effects of the drugs, and they have researched HIV, then I'm actually quite happy, because that's actually a first step that was already taken on the patient's part. We deal with larger issues here where patients don't even want to hear about it. And so that's one step back. We have to get them to, take that extra step that the person you just described to me has already taken.
There was a case in Canada not long ago of a woman who was convicted. I forget exactly what the offense was. It was something like failing to provide the necessities of life to a child or something, because she was either refused to give ACT to the baby, or she was breastfeeding the baby.
Yes.
That's, I guess, kind of close to some of these Law and Order episodes. What do you think about cases like that? And if you were approached by, say, a prosecutor, what would your advice be?
I actually am quite stern about those things, and I can tell you now that they're never going to put me on a jury based on what my answers would be. I believe that even if a patient or a person cannot believe that there's a causal relationship between HIV/AIDS and opportunistic infections and death, that there is not an associative relationship. And to me, the association is strong enough to warrant treatment, especially with the newer drugs that we have on the market, because we have fewer side effects, and we have better long-term data. And when it's another human being involved, I think that we need to give science the benefit of the doubt.
So what you're saying is that it's not really necessary to prove that there's a causal association between HIV and AIDS, as long as there is a well-documented association.
In my eyes, yes. because and this is not just true in HIV and AIDS, but there are a lot of other diseases out there where we are not 100% sure that we have a causal relationship, yet we still treat those. And it's always a balance between advantages and disadvantages, or pros and cons. And unfortunately, the disadvantage to not treating when someone has HIV or AIDS is catastrophic. It's not something that you can ameliorate later on. So like I said before, if there is another human being involved, you have to give it the benefit of the doubt.
Now, when you say the effects are catastrophic, are you referring strictly to your patient population? Because it seems these are people that face unusual life challenges, certainly not the life challenges that someone like myself would face. So anyone, is that kind of like an equalizing factor between the upper middle class housewife and the indigent, perhaps drug-addicted person who has not attended school and has trouble meeting their basic needs? Would HIV be that equalizing factor between them?
Yes. Unfortunately, the patients who come here probably have more challenges, and that's why we do get patients presenting much later in the disease here.
I see, yeah. And again, just to... What is denialism, and what is a denialist?
So, a denialist is a person who doubts that HIV causes AIDS, or that AIDS can cause opportunistic infections and death. So there's a whole spectrum of it.
So they're not denying, they're doubting?
The doubters would also fall into that category. There's a whole spectrum. There are people, of course, they would deny it, and then there are the people who doubt it and hence won't do anything about it. So they, from what I understand, all fall into that denialist category.
Is there some piece of information that you've received from the CDC or something that says this is the profile of a denier as opposed to a doubter, as opposed to someone who has questions, and this is how you distinguish one from the other? It seems as though you're almost citing some information you may have received somewhere or read somewhere.
Oh, well, we actually did quite a bit of research before we went in to speak with the writers at Law Order, and there turns out to be quite a bit of information out there, at least on the internet, about this topic, and there's a wide range of people who belong in that category. So it wasn't necessarily the CDC. The CDC, who also works with Hollywood and Health, actually does have information on it, but there are a lot of other sources on the internet as well.
But is there anything that defines the difference between a doubter, someone who's asking questions, and someone who you would put in that category?
Oh, I see. Yeah, so there are people in the denialist category who don't seem to be as open to more information or to hearing about other data that may refute their beliefs, and definitely those people are the most challenging. And unfortunately, sometimes no matter what we do, we can't change someone's mind, and people have a right, to think however they want, and it is my belief that they, can determine their own futures, but when there's an innocent child involved, then it gets much grayer.
Can I ask about another category of person? Okay. I mean, let's say that somebody said, okay, I accept that HIV causes AIDS, but I'm aware that if a mother's untreated, there's only a 25% chance of transmission. And I'm also aware that the drug AZT interferes with DNA synthesis and is being associated in animals anyway with cancer and mutagens and mutagenic effects and also birth defects. And there's some evidence in humans as well of some of these problems. So they might say, okay, well, I accept HIV/AIDS, but I'm not going to accept this drug. How would you respond to a person like that?
And here, and it's a woman, right?
Well, it would be a woman faced with either you must take this drug or your baby must take this drug.
I see. Okay. And I'm glad actually that she looked into the drug because at least she shows interest in what's going on. I wouldn't refute that. You know that with women who are pregnant, we try to minimize any external drugs that we give them in any way. So it is not without a warning that we would recommend drugs anyway. What we would do is we would try to provide her with whatever data that we have, because AZT has been used for quite a while, and it's been used pretty much all over the world in pregnant women. In this country, we don't just use AZT in pregnant women anymore. That's what we call monotherapy. We try not to do monotherapy anymore for her sake and for the child's sake. But we do monitor these women very carefully, and actually here at LA County USC, we have a program for pregnant women who are HIV positive. They get delivered by a specialist who just delivers HIV positive women, and our negative rate is tremendous here. So, and we follow these children as they age, and thankfully we haven't had, I think we haven't had any positive babies in women who were known to be HIV positive prior to going into active labor. So we take care of the HIV negative as well as HIV positive children, because sometimes we do get them when we don't know they're HIV positive in labor. And we can give her data, just general data. We can't give them the patient's information, but general data about what happens with these children. We even have information about what happens to children who are also not treated. And we would like to arm patients with as much information as possible. And so that's why, I told you before how happy I am when patients are receptive to information.
But what if they're not? I mean, that's getting back to the Law and Order. So a woman says, well, thanks for all this information.
Actually, I think the situation in Law and Order was more like a woman had been misled by a medical professional. Is that more of the situation that occurred on Law and Order?
Yeah, that's I think more accurate.
So, unfortunately, there are a lot of providers out there, and the degree of knowledge about HIV varies greatly. And unfortunately, if you go online, you'll see providers who are actually in the denialist camp as well. And so,
how does one distinguish a provider who's in the denialist camp? Getting back to that question I keep asking, is there a wanted poster? Is there a list of requirements? Are there things you can check off? And if you get to 10, they're a denialist? I mean, how do we get to that point?
So what would happen is unfortunately, it has to be a patient who's well informed going into the doctor's office. You have to know, first of all, you have to make sure that your doctor is up to date with current information, if possible. And to, unfortunately, patients have to do their homework. They have to look doctors up any way they can. Usually, there are a lot of sources on the internet as well where you can look up your own physician to see what patients have said about their doctor. So you can get information that way. And you, in most pregnant women, interview different doctors to see who they want. And during that interview, you can usually get a flavor of how he or she practices. And HIV in pregnancy is always a big topic because, HIV testing is strongly recommended for pregnant women, and if a doctor doesn't even recommend it, you know that something is up.
What if a doctor recommends it and a patient says, I feel I've informed myself on this and I respectfully choose not to consume that drug during my pregnancy?
Oh, so she did turn out positive, or she didn't take the test?
No, this person would have taken the test,
Okay.
comes in knowing they're positive, comes in having done quite a lot of research and says, I'll hear what you have to say, and now I'll present my questions. And after a discussion, let's say a lively discussion, this person says, I don't feel comfortable taking these drugs during pregnancy. I see that they have very serious side effects, including mitochondrial DNA toxicities. I can experience diarrhea, nausea, vomiting while I'm pregnant. I can suffer from hepatic disorders, kidney failure, loss of appetite, numbness of the mouth, sleep disorders. There's bone necrosis. I really don't feel...
metabolic syndrome.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
I don't feel comfortable taking these drugs.
Yes. So what would happen in our institution is we have something called an ethics committee, which I think every institution has. And the case would be brought and presented at one of the committee meetings, and recommendations about what would happen at that point would be made at that. And fortunately for me, I've never had to do that, because if patients don't own up to their HIV, then they wouldn't be coming to see me anyway. So I wouldn't have to. Have not had to deal with that situation. But if something like that did happen to a provider, he or she most likely would be presenting that case to an ethics committee. And part of the ethics committee, or most of them, would have a psychiatrist and would have someone from risk management. And, they may recommend that further steps be taken. And
what might these steps be?
So further steps would, unfortunately, be legal steps, in which social work would get involved. And, of course, part of risk management, I'm sure we have a team of lawyers. Of course, I've never worked with them like that, but they would, at that point, determine if they need to go to a judge and force adherence to a regimen. But there are a lot of factors involved, and sometimes the patient, the woman who's refusing treatment, may be required to undergo a psychiatric or psychological evaluation to make sure that he or she is capable. She is capable of making a decision like that, and so that would just be one thing that could happen.
Now, is there any other field of medicine in which, if somebody says, you know what, those therapies that you're offering, they seem like they might be as bad as a disease? I'm sitting here with a report in front of me.
Well, that's true. Think of cancer.
Yeah, exactly. This study says grade 4 events are as important as AIDS events in the era of heart. And this was published in, the Journal of Acquired Immune Deficiency Syndrome a couple years ago. And basically what it says is, now that heart drugs are out, you have as much chance of dying or experiencing serious adverse effects of heart as you do from having the same sorts of troubles due to what we call AIDS. So given that, if somebody makes, and it's not that they're, as you said, not owning up to this, but they've come and they've said, look, I've done a lot of research, I've always been a healthy person, and I feel like I don't want to engage in this. That person there expressing themselves as well as say I am today would be subject to a psychiatric evaluation nonetheless?
Actually, it gets more complicated than that, because if you're feeling well, and of course we do labs on people, physical exams. We're not starting HIV meds in everyone who has HIV. So there are other criteria that we look at, and actually we're very happy when someone has HIV and they're feeling well, because most likely their numbers are good too. and in which case we would not even recommend starting therapy.
So if they're feeling well but their numbers indicate otherwise?
Yes, if their numbers are bad and they're feeling well, they still have a right to refuse. And it's very unfortunate, but I can tell you that we do have a number of patients here who feel well, and their numbers start out good. We do request to bring them back on a regular basis to check on them, and some of them come back on a regular basis the way they're recommended to. We check their labs. Unfortunately, the immune system starts waning, and the amount of virus in them starts increasing, sometimes gradually, sometimes rather rapidly, and they have a right to refuse therapy. And unfortunately, we do sometimes have to watch them die. They have a right to decide what they want to do. We do counsel them, and we do make judgments on whether or not they're able to make that decision. It doesn't always warrant a visit upstairs to our psychiatrist or a social worker, although every patient gets a social work visit. And sometimes they just decide that they would rather live with the consequences of not treating themselves, and they fully understand. And these are patients who even know what's going to happen to them, and that's what they choose.
I have a question. Like, if a woman, let's say a woman was diagnosed HIV positive for the first time during pregnancy, and you were counseling this woman, and she says, well, maybe I'm going to be okay for a long time. How would you tell her in terms of time that where you could guarantee that she'll be sick within a year, 5 years?
You know what? We can't do that anymore. It turns out that people are different hosts, and you have different viruses act differently in different hosts. And so actually we do have some patients who seem to be able to somewhat control the virus in their bodies. And so it was believed that people died within 10 years of being initially infected. And now that we've had a lot more experience with patients from different parts of the world with different kinds of viruses, we know that's not necessarily true. So there's a group of patients called slow non-progressors who seem to live at some homeostasis with the virus, and they're able to control it for a much longer time than other people.
So if I translate, can I translate that into English?
Oh, sorry.
So some people, and I presume you can't tell who, could maybe live 20, 30 years without health consequences from HIV? Is that what you're saying?
Well, I don't know about the 30 years, but we do have patients who seem to be able to control the virus for more than 10 years. And currently the CDC is doing research to see exactly what is it about the host, what is it about their particular virus that allows them to do that, right? Because that may have an implication on how we treat patients in the future.
And these are patients not taking drugs or not?
No, not taking drugs, because it doesn't count if they're taking drugs.
Right.
So if a woman told me that she thinks that she's going to be fine, I would tell her, I hope you do. I hope you're one of those people, because that's true. Possibly she is. I don't know. I'm not going to know until she keeps coming back. So, and those people, they really won the lottery there. They could be off of drugs for a very long time.
Dr. Dee, at this point in the program, I just want to share with you, when I gave you the name of the program and my name and David's name, I don't know if you did any research about our program, but we present news and information that isn't often presented in the mainstream media. And many of our discussions on this program have been with people who had inexplicable positive, negative results from the test, people who've been HIV positive for a number of years and have not experienced illness. We've got a guest upcoming who's actually, you're going to love this. He wrote a book called Immune, How to Beat AIDS in Your Kitchen.
Oh,
and
okay.
He's got a protocol that he says saved his life and that he's sharing with other people as a way to be healthy in a variety of circumstances, including after testing HIV positive. So I wanted to let you know that. And then on a more personal note, I gave you my name, Christine Maggiore, and I recently went on the internet, and there's a place called Media News where they report on television shows. And I looked up the Law Order episode, and it said it was based on me. It says, a Los Angeles mother is basis of Law Order HIV episode.
Oh,
Underneath
and then they named you?
Yes, they did. The episode of Law and Order, not particularly.
Oh, my gosh.
It says the episode of Law and Order Special's Victims Unit that aired Tuesday, October 28th on NBC attempted to take on, quote, AIDS denialism. The story centered on a character obviously based on Rethinking AIDS board member and Alive and Well founder Christine Maggiore. Maggiore's young daughter died in May 2005 of an amoxicillin reaction wrongly declared to be, quote, AIDS. That's what this Media News blog site said about the program.
Gosh, aren't they supposed to ask your consent to do something like that?
No. I've been incarnated 3 times now in primetime television, and nobody's bothered to mention it to me. But I want you to know completely that I'm a person. I've been HIV positive for almost 17 years.
Oh, wow. Good.
I've never taken any medication.
So you're probably one of those slow non-progressors.
Well, that's always been an interesting proposal to me, because the only way you get to be a slow non-progressor is by being what you might call in denial, or not owning up to it, or somebody who doubts and can't believe it. But actually, I've been investigating this for a long time, and I feel I've approached this with a great deal of serious inquiry. Yet I find that my personal likeness is kind of tossed around in the, not only in the world of television, but also in medical settings where people talk about these denialists. I suppose that...
And you didn't even intend to start that off, did you? You were just being yourself.
Well, actually, I started off back in 1992, scared out of my mind.
Well, that's understandable.
I became a public speaker and educator for AIDS Project Los Angeles, for Women at Risk, and LA Shanti Foundation. And it wasn't until about a year or so into my diagnosis and my public service and my supposed death sentence, I was told I had 5 to 7 years, that I encountered some alternative information, I would call it, rather than this new pejorative term, denialism. And it just prompted me to look into this and see what it was about, mostly because concurrent with that, I met a doctor who said I should retest. She said I didn't fit the profile of an AIDS patient. I retested indeterminate, positive, negative, and then positive again.
Oh, gosh. I'm sorry about that.
Yeah, I was too. But
did they do a viral load? Because that's what we often do for those patients.
Well, I've had viral loads that when they were first developing the viral load test back in 1996, when they brought it out, they were giving them away for $10.
Oh, I didn't know that.
So I went and had several. It was kind of like the Blue Plate special. And I had a viral load that was so high it went off the charts.
Oh, gosh.
And that was followed a couple weeks later by a viral load of 980. No explanation.
Wow. You know, that's why I was telling you earlier that we don't understand everything. And it's unfortunate because, you know, we're dealing with people's lives here and decisions that people have to make. And I wish we had more information. It's a matter of time, you know, that we'll be able to gather more information. But like I told you, no one's going to tell you we know it all.
Yeah, and I've learned that in my own experiences, and because of the route that I've chosen to take, I've encountered a number of people. I don't know if you ever read or saw any media reports on a woman named Kathleen Tyson in Eugene, Oregon. I suppose she could be tossed into that denialist category. This healthy woman, a dancer, and all of her life and very conscious of the food she ate, married for 10 years, suddenly found herself pregnant for a second time, and suddenly testing HIV positive, even though her husband tested negative, and I think her daughter at the time was 10 or 11 years old, also tested negative. She took the drugs for a while. They made her quite ill. She had diarrhea and fatigue. She just couldn't get out of bed, and she thought, what is this doing to my baby if this is what this is doing to me? So she stopped taking them, and she had a hospital birth, and the ethics committee was called in because she had done some research, and she decided she wanted to breastfeed. And she did research on this. Nevertheless, the ethics committee immediately notified Child Protective Services. They showed up with an armed security guard.
Oh, my gosh.
And told her she needed to stop breastfeeding. They took protective custody of her son, who was born HIV negative. And remained HIV negative, and she went through a whole hoopla. And I know several other women in similar circumstance to me who make a decision to not take the drugs, many during pregnancy, and give birth to healthy children who later test HIV negative. And I wondered if you had ever heard of that or read about that in any way that wasn't perhaps disparaging.
No, actually, I'm very happy when women have children who are HIV negative. So, it's not 100% transmission rate, even if a woman has a super high viral load or has a lot of virus in her blood, and tests positive every single time on HIV test. It's not a given that the child will be HIV positive, and that's true even if you breastfeed. So of course and I'm sure every other provider would be very happy about that.
My husband, too, we've been together for 12 years, and we've just maintained a normal relationship, like everybody else on our block, I suppose. And he persistently tests negative. My son tests negative, and despite quite a lot of media and discussions on internet websites that are not particularly kind, my daughter never tested positive by any normal testing means, the one who passed away in May.
Oh, I'm sorry about that.
Yeah, believe me, I was too. And right now, my family and I are in a lawsuit with the Los Angeles County Coroner's Office because we feel that based on a prejudicial image of myself as someone who HIV positive and doesn't take the drug therapies and speaks openly about this inquiry I've been engaged in for the last almost 17 years, they decided to give my daughter AIDS, so to speak. There's no biomedical evidence that points to pneumonia, that she died of any kind of pneumonia at all. And it's quite the interesting case. I don't know if in your research for the program you might have come upon the website about my daughter. The website is called Justice for EJ.
Oh, no, I don't think I went to that one. But I can check it out.
I noticed in the episode there is a 4-year-old girl who, it's in this world of television, her, the weird doctor dude guy likens himself to Jesus Christ.
Oh, gosh.
Yes. He says that this little girl died of an amoxicillin reaction. And then they exhume her and find out that she supposedly died of PC pneumonia.
Oh, my gosh. Did they really do that to your daughter?
No. What actually happened is she went into sudden cardiac arrest. We called 911. This was about 30 hours after her initiating her first ever antibiotic. They revived her and took her to an emergency room where she died again 4 hours later of no known cause. She was referred to the coroner's office, and they performed an autopsy and could find no cause of death. There was no obvious disease, no injury, nothing that they could find. 10 days later, they still had found nothing. They tried growing things in spinal fluid culture for quite some time, and nothing came up. And then 4 months later, the coroner's office leaked to the Los Angeles Times before telling us.
Gosh, that doesn't sound right.
Yes, it was quite pleasant. They decided to announce that our daughter had died of AIDS pneumonia, and that I was a
And that's how you found out, huh?
Well, they called our house later and kind of did a ha-ha announcement. But the Times were the first to know.
Oh, that's not
But
nice.
apparently this program was kind of a twist on me. And
it must have been very difficult for you to watch the show. I mean, worse.
I think the worst part, and I honestly haven't watched the whole thing because, like you said, it made you kind of ill.
Yes, exactly.
There's this me character on the witness stand being cross-examined about, being responsible for the death of her daughter. And they're saying to this me person, by essentially not giving your daughter the drug therapy she needed, you killed her. You killed your daughter. And this me person starts to stammer and then convulse and then hit the courtroom floor. And then the next scene, I'm apparently dead. And for some reason on Law & Order, I don't know if you've ever noticed this, it's like they suffer from a severe lack of light bulbs. But there's this doctor who comes out of the shadows and said, yes, she died of AIDS. And this other one says, and her brain was eaten away by toxoplasmosis. Her brain was like Swiss cheese. And sometimes I look at these things and I think, is that someone's wish for me? Is it so contentious in this world of HIV and AIDS that people like me can't even make a decision, an informed decision about how they're going to live their lives that are not your life or the next guy in the next room's life, our lives, that we're considered crazy or considered irresponsible, not owning up. Our minds are clouded by guilt. And we need to see psychiatrists. And gosh
I don't
darn,
think that people wish ill.
We're going to be on television. They're going to show the worst possible thing
I know.
ever.
Oh, my gosh. I can't believe you actually were able to sit through that. I can't speak for every provider out there, but most of us, I'd like to think, go into this field so that we could relieve suffering. And it doesn't matter who we're relieving suffering from. So, but we do take an oath, and we need to try to stick to it. So, I would go out there and help, the president, the Pope, just as much as I would help, someone I didn't know. So, actually, I guess I don't know the president very well either.
Which one, the old one or the new one?
Well, for your sake, if anybody shows up, I hope it's a new one.
Yes.
But, it doesn't matter to me, and hence, that's why I'm a county doc, because if it did matter to me, I probably don't think I would be working here. But, it doesn't matter to me the decisions that someone's made before. I treat them all equally, so I'd like to think I do. Or I try, at least.
That's really good to know. And with just part of the motivation of this program is to build bridges, to create dialogue and discussion in a respectful forum, and I certainly hope you feel that you've been respected today.
Oh, yes. I'm glad that you were able to contact me and we could do this. And I'm very sorry for you, everything that's happened to you. I can't imagine something as horrible as that happening.
It was a triple horror special.
Yes, and you're still reliving it. I mean, people can't let it go.
No, gosh,
They don't appear to want to.
Yes, and I can tell you, like I told you at the beginning, they didn't tell us what the story was about. They just said, we have questions about HIV. Can you, come and answer some general questions? And in fact, not all the questions were about HIV. So we really had no idea what was going to happen. And had they told me that they would be portraying someone without her consent, I don't know if I would have been as open about the whole project. But I guess I'm very sorry that that something like that happened.
Well, thank you for saying that. And looking more toward the future rather than back in the past here, I wonder, David and I are always interested in the possibility of open exchange and dialogue. And given that apparently there's doctors at your clinic who have some strong feelings about what denialism may or may not be, and when people need to go see a psychiatrist about this, I wonder if it might be possible at some point in the future to actually meet up, to actually have a discussion about what it is that people who are often tossed into this denialist category actually have questions and concerns about, and see if it might be possible to provide some answers that would alleviate those concerns, so the two so-called sides might move a little closer together.
That would be great. And I don't personally take care of pregnant women. We do have a separate clinic that does that, and so it may be good to set you up with them. Of course, this time of year is very difficult around the holidays.
Yeah, I don't think we were talking about tomorrow.
Okay.
sometime in the next.
So let me
months.
know, and I can give you some names and what each person does, and you can tell me who you would be interested in me contacting.
And that would be fantastic.
Oh yeah, no problem.
Yeah, this has been a very interesting discussion, and I really appreciate you talking to us, knowing that we don't agree on everything, but we were able to discuss a lot of different issues and share different viewpoints.
It would be boring if everyone agreed on everything.
Well, I certainly agree with that. I make it.
You wouldn't learn very much either.
I'd have to invent reasons to disagree.
So, I guess we can call this a show.
Yeah. Thank you so much for being with us.
No problem.
Yeah,
so just shoot me an email if you need anything else.
Great. Yeah, and do you have an email, a website that you would like us to link to on our program? We offer our guests the possibility of having us link to their website or something that they feel strongly about and follow up to the program when it's posted. And if you'd like us to link to your clinic or another website, please let us know, because that will be posted along with the program.
Oh, actually, I don't have my own website, but you can find our clinic through the LA County USC website.
Okay.
And then if anyone is interested in contacting us, all the information's on there.
Okay, fantastic.
Well, thank you very much for your time today.
Oh, thank you, and thank you for putting up with all our technical weird things.
Yes.
No, that's okay.
Thank you so much.
Oh, no problem. Have a good Thanksgiving.
Thank you.
You
too.
too.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
thanks. Bye.
So that was a very interesting conversation, David, and I have to admit, at certain times, I was shaking. It was very challenging for me to listen to some things that were being said about this notion of denialism and who's a denialist, as if that term is somehow descriptive rather than pejorative.
It was a very calm discussion. Very civilized, and I was kind of a bit surprised, but that was sustained throughout the whole program. I felt there was a little bit of, if I can make a sidewalk psychological diagnosis, a little bit of cognitive dissonance, that we were talking dispassionately, that she was talking dispassionately about what needed to be done to denialists, and in that category she threw doubters. At the same time, she was empathizing with you, who by her definition would be a very strong denialist, and how you were portrayed in a television program that she'd helped to get on the air. Yeah,
and throughout this discussion and my previous conversations with Dr. Dee, because I've had a couple, I'm struck by her intelligence. She's fun to talk with. She's very dedicated. You have to be to work in an LA County clinic and deal with the very difficult situations that one faces when treating our county's poorest people.
Right.
You don't do that for fun. You don't do that for glory.
Yeah, I felt that she was a very nice woman and very sincere. And that's, I had a little bit of cognitive dissonance too. I'm empathizing very strongly with her and her position. At the same time, I'm trying to reconcile that with what I think is really going on in these clinics, where people are only being told one side of the equation, and fancy terms, fancy concepts like informed consent don't really apply, because if you don't consent, then they'll get you to see a psychiatrist. to find out
Right,
what's
that was
wrong
the
with you.
scariest part for me. Well, we'd send him up to the psych ward for evaluation, and that was in reference to pregnant women, and I've been a pregnant woman twice,
Yeah.
and I am quite certain that I don't lose my intellectual abilities just because I weigh 45 pounds more and want to eat weird food.
Did you get a little forgetful? Was that when you were pregnant, were you a little forgetful?
I don't remember.
You don't remember. But not enough that you had to go see a psychiatrist to figure out
No,
why.
definitely not. Definitely not.
Where
and I
you'd
did
put your
not
keys.
forget what I know.
Yes.
So, yeah. Another interesting point that came up for me in this discussion was her patient population she described as, marginalized people, homeless, uninsured, unemployed,
Illiterate.
Non-English speaking many times, drug addicted. And those people are in denial based on, she indicated, their ignorance to the biomedical facts and then the guilt they feel over testing positive. Now, I wonder if we cannot create a place for people who don't speak English, who aren't particularly well educated, may not have a home, and may have drug problems, to ask questions anyway about this whole HIV/AIDS thing based maybe on intuition or personal experience. I mean, why is there an exception to the rule of denialism that you get when you are a homeowner and driving a new car, speaking English and able to clearly express yourself?
Well,
It doesn't seem quite fair.
Yeah, if the human race is perhaps 1 million years old, I'm not an anthropologist, so I don't know exactly. You'd have to say that for the vast majority of that time, everybody's being illiterate, or the vast majority of people, and they survived quite nicely. And after a few centuries, a few thousand years of literacy, and maybe a few hundred years of widespread literacy, we've almost eliminated ourselves from the planet in terms of our environmental degradation. So I think illiterate people are still very intelligent in a very different way. They understand a lot of things very clearly, and it's definitely not fair to say that they're not intelligent. Maybe they can't read the biomedical literature, but according to Dr. Dee, it doesn't really matter, because if you do read it, you're still in denial if you don't agree with them.
Right. And just on the topic of illiteracy, when I was living in Italy, which I did for a number of years, I was very surprised to learn that the parents of a lot of my friends were illiterate. They grew up during a war and were never able to attend school and learn to read. Yet with these same people, I had some of the most lively and interesting debates and discussions you could imagine. And certainly their intelligence and insights had nothing to do with their lack of ability to read the newspaper.
Yes. Yeah.
So anyway, we will be back in a week with another episode of How Positive Are You, number 12. And in this one, we have a very interesting guest. He's actually on page 41 of my book. And this is something I didn't know when we reached out to him as a potential visitor to our program. His name is Bob Navarro, and he's a newscaster who got into all kinds of hot water for simply reading on an on-air editorial some facts about HIV and AIDS that he had received from the U.S. Centers for Disease Control that was not particularly favorable to the idea that AIDS is an out-of-control epidemic and affecting everyone.
I'm really looking forward to that. I think media censorship is something that we haven't covered in depth yet, and I think this will be a unique opportunity to find out a little bit more about how people in the media are brought into line.
Yeah, I think it'll be good. So please join us again for How Positive Are You, and thanks for listening today.
Yes, and before I go, make sure you check out our new website, howpositiveareyou.com, and tell all your friends about this podcast. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.